$60 billion. That is the number that fell like a thunderclap in Ouagadougou, shaking not only the hall of power, but the imagination of an entire continent. Beneath the soil of Burkina Faso, geologists revealed a hidden treasury. 1,200 tons of pure gold, a fortune vast enough to redraw maps, rewrite contracts, and rekindle both hope and fear. How can a nation ranked among the poorest suddenly sit atop wealth that empires covet? Is this the long-awaited harvest of justice, or the beginning of yet another curse disguised as a blessing? The cameras turned to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. His voice cut through history's echo. This gold will not feed foreign banks. It will serve barefoot children and calloused farmers. Yet across the Sahel, elders shook their heads, remembering Congo's blood, Niger's darkness, Angola's hollow wealth. Could this young leader truly break the cycle? Or was Burkina Faso destined to become the next cautionary tale of abundance turned into ashes? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It may be the hinge of history. Subscribe and walk with us, because what begins in Ouagadougou today may decide not only the future of one nation, but the dignity of a continent long denied its own harvest. The morning sun over Ouagadougou carried the weight of centuries. It was not the heat that pressed upon the capital, but the revelation whispered for months and finally declared with thunder. Beneath the dry earth of Kaya, Gawa, and Bulsa lay one of the richest untapped treasures Africa had ever seen. More than 1,200 tons of gold, valued at over $60 billion, rested in silence, waiting for the first pickaxe, the first contract, the first bargain that could decide the destiny of a nation. In the conference hall, flashes from cameras lit the Minister of Energy like lightning over a storm. His words trembled between pride and warning. For the first time in our history, this wealth will not be dug to enrich foreign banks. This gold will serve the barefoot child in Dori, the mother in Bobo Dioulasso, the farmer in Banfora. Applause erupted, fists rose high, and for a fleeting moment the nation's wounds seemed to glow with possibility. Yet outside the hall, under rusted motorbikes and shaded tea shops, skepticism simmered. In Kaya, a young man shook his head at his friend. "We heard the same in Niger with oil, in Arlit with uranium. Tell me, brother, what changed?" His words carried the chill of a familiar betrayal, the kind that had stained Africa's soil too many times. Captain Ibrahim Traoré gathered his ministers, his hand heavy on the survey report. "This is not a blessing if we repeat the mistakes of the past," he declared. "We must write a new story. Do you hear me? A new story." Around the table, nods followed his voice, but in their eyes flickered shadows of Congo's coltan, Angola's oil, Niger's uranium. Resources once hailed as saviors, yet turned into shackles. Western headlines wasted no time. The Financial Times called it Africa's new gold frontier. Reuters reported that mining firms from Canada to Australia had already requested licenses. Bloomberg analysts spoke of a potential tenfold increase in Burkina Faso's GDP if, they whispered, the reserves were managed properly. Such numbers painted glittering futures, but behind every figure was an unspoken question. Managed by whom and for whose gain? In Bulsa, elders sat beneath a neem tree, their voices carrying wisdom worn by the desert wind. "This is our treasure," one said softly. "But whose trucks will carry it away? Whose banks will it enrich?" Another replied, bitterness dripping from his words. "Gold does not glitter for the poor. It blinds them." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating as the truth pressed against every heart. That evening, the captain's face appeared on national television, framed by the red, green, and gold of the nation's flag. His tone was resolute. "This discovery is not a prize for foreign corporations, nor a gift to bankers in Paris or Toronto. It is the inheritance of every Burkinabé." Cheers erupted in living rooms across the country, yet in the quiet of those same homes, whispers grew. Could even the strongest will withstand the tide of global desire? once the rush began. Within days, jets descended on Ouagadougou. Diplomats, consultants, executives, men in polished shoes carrying briefcases heavier than their promises, streamed into hotels. In their whispers floated numbers, concessions, percentages. $60 billion in the ground. Who would be first? The government spoke of sovereignty, transparency, and fairness. But hadn't other nations spoken the same words before the bulldozers arrived? Before rivers turned to poison? Before the land bore scars deeper than mines? A miner in Gawa, his palms calloused from 20 years of digging with bare hands, sat upon a wooden stool and said what many feared. "We have always known there was gold here, but when they dig with machines and carry it across oceans, will my children still walk to school without shoes?" His question did not demand an answer. It exposed a wound. And so, as the red earth of Burkina Faso shivered with the weight of buried treasure, the nation stood before a mirror. In its reflection gleamed both promise and peril. Was this the dawn of a golden age, or the rebirth of a curse that Africa had known too well? What happens when a poor nation, long exploited, suddenly sits on riches vast enough to summon empires? Will it rise in dignity, or fall into the same shadows that swallowed others before? The hall of Burkina Faso's National Assembly trembled not from gunfire, but from words. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood tall, his uniform bearing the dust of the Sahel, his fist slamming against the oak desk. "Do you think Niger chose darkness? Do you think Congo chose blood? Do you think Angola chose hunger?" His voice thundered like drums of war. No, they were pushed into it, trapped by contracts signed in silence, in offices far away from their people. "We will not walk into that same trap." The chamber erupted. Some pounded their desks in rhythm with his defiance. Others rose to their feet, tears brimming in their eyes. Beyond those walls, in student halls across Ouagadougou, young men and women pressed their ears to flickering television sets. One whispered, "Can he truly resist them? Toronto, Brussels, Beijing." Another replied, without turning his gaze, "If he cannot, who else will?" In that moment, the ghost of Thomas Sankara walked again in those halls, his warning echoing across decades. "He who feeds you controls you. He who minds you owns you." Crowds filled Independence Square, dust rising like incense in the late afternoon sun. Flags waved, fists pierced the sky, chants of sovereignty rolled like thunder. In Kaya, mothers raised their children high, as if to place them directly beneath the shield of Traoré's promise. "Not 1 kilogram of gold will leave our soil without value returning to our people." His declaration ignited a fire in hearts that had too often been left in darkness. But not all hearts trusted. In Bobo Dioulasso, an old miner leaned on his shovel and muttered, "We heard this before. We heard it in Angola's oil fields, in Niger's uranium mines." Words cannot feed children. His suspicion was not cynicism. It was survival, carved into memory by decades of disappointment. Meanwhile, the world's newspapers rushed to print. The Financial Times declared Burkina Faso the new gold frontier of Africa. Reuters noted that international mining firms had already queued with exploration licenses. Bloomberg analysts promised glittering futures, speaking of GDP multiplied tenfold, if the reserves were managed properly. Properly, of course, meaning profitably for others. Foreign embassies buzzed. In hotel lobbies, Canadian executives exchanged guarded smiles with Australian investors. Representatives from the Gulf unfolded old contracts, whispering of partnerships. Paris frowned. Washington hesitated. Beijing calculated. Each power played its game, each eyeing the same prize beneath the red earth. Yet Traoré was not content with promises. In late 2024, his government froze a deal signed by the previous regime, a Canadian conglomerate's memorandum that allowed it to recoup 100% of its investment before the state saw a single coin. "We are not partners with robbers," declared the finance minister on national television. His words spread like fire, painted on walls, shouted in markets, sung by school children. By June 2025, the stakes escalated. 5 major gold mines were nationalized. transferred to the state-owned Sopamebe. Miners in Bulsa raised their helmets in celebration, singing of dignity reclaimed. But in boardrooms abroad, the mood was less triumphant. Investors trembled, diplomats muttered, and lawyers sharpened their pens. Could a small Sahelian nation truly dictate terms to global giants? The backlash was swift. An Australian company was caught funneling profits through offshore accounts. Its license was revoked within weeks. A UAE-backed consortium failed to disclose subcontracting deals. Its contract was suspended. The government's statement was blunt: no transparency, no license. It was a message Africa had long waited to hear, yet rarely dared to enforce. At a university debate in Bobo Dioulasso, voices clashed. One student shouted, "Traore is too radical. He will scare investors away." Another rose, his voice like a blade. "And what did investors give Niger? Uranium for Paris, darkness for Niamey. Do you want the same fate?" The room erupted, the air thick with questions too urgent to ignore. In the streets, graffiti appeared. "This gold belongs to us, or to no one." Some read it as despair, others as a call to arms. But for Traore, it was both a warning and a mandate. The captain's defiance had become the nation's heartbeat. But behind every heartbeat, history whispered, could one man's fire withstand the storm of foreign ambition, lawsuits, and backroom deals? Would Traore's radical defiance carve a new path of dignity, or would it isolate Burkina Faso, leaving the nation to stand alone against empires that never sleep? The promise of $60 billion glimmered like a new dawn, but beneath its light lay shadows that stretched across villages and lives. In April 2005, the ground swallowed 17 artisanal miners in a sudden collapse near Pama. Mothers wailed, fathers clawed at the soil with bare hands, but the earth refused to give them back. The tragedy was not merely a statistic. It was the echo of metal against stone, silenced forever. The next day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the cameras, his eyes harder than steel. "No ounce of gold is worth 17 lives. From this day, unregulated pits will be shut down, and the state will take control." His decree resonated, but the question lingered. Could law alone stop desperation? For in Kaya, where wells once ran clear, water now ran red, with the stench of chemicals. Women lifted buckets, staring at the poisoned liquid. If even water turns against us, how will we feed our children? The Ministry of Environment confirmed the worst. Cyanide-based processing had contaminated the rivers. In response, Traoré signed an emergency ban on cyanide near waterways and commissioned purification units. But the soil, once broken, rarely forgives. The scars of extraction cut deeper than stone. Hospitals soon overflowed. The World Health Organization reported a 31% rise in respiratory illnesses among children living near mining zones in just 8 months. In Gawa, corridors filled with coughing children, doctors whispering their helplessness. The dust is stronger than our medicine. When Traoré heard, he summoned his health minister. "Then we must bring medicine stronger than the dust. Allocate funds now, even if we cut our own salaries." His voice was not theater. It was desperation channeled into resolve, and yet the deepest wounds were not in lungs, but in dignity. Inspectors uncovered children as young as 12 carrying sacks of ore heavier than their bodies for just a few coins a day. At a press briefing, Traoré's anger broke through. "A child belongs in a classroom, not a tunnel. From this year, any company found employing children will lose its license, not suspended, revoked." He ordered scholarships for 5,000 children from mining families, promising books instead of burdens. But hunger is a cruel adversary. Could promises of schooling tomorrow outweigh the empty stomachs of today? The crisis did not end with health and childhood. Sacred mossy sites, drum houses centuries old, were bulldozed to clear ground for tailings. Elders wept as their ancestors' memory was reduced to rubble. Standing before a crowd in Ouagadougou, Traoré declared, "Gold may glitter, but identity is priceless. Our ancestors are not collateral damage." He decreed those lands protected as national heritage. The crowd roared, yet bulldozers waited at the border, and faith alone could not stop them. The nation stood at a crossroads. On one side, promises of wealth, scholarships, purified water, and reclaimed dignity. On the other, poisoned rivers, broken lungs, and bulldozed traditions. The question hung heavy. Was this a renaissance or merely another chapter in the long curse of African soil? It was here that voices began to speak of anti-colonial Africa not as a slogan, but as a survival code. Activists painted it on walls, preachers thundered it in sermons, students debated it in classrooms. The meaning was clear. No longer would Africa be stripped bare under the guise of partnership. This was not only about gold, it was about a continent's right to refuse the old script. Yet refusal came at a cost. Smuggling routes through Togo and Mali drained millions nightly. Illegal shipments vanished into shadows. Traore's answer was blunt. We fight shadows with light. Every contract must be published, every shipment tracked. Let the world see who profits and who pays. By June 2025, a special environmental police was deployed to raid pits and seize trucks of smuggled ore. Still, villagers asked, can law replace lost rivers? Can clinics rebuild broken lungs? Graffiti appeared again in the capital. If gold is a curse, let it stay buried. Others replied beside it. If gold is a blessing, let it feed us all. The walls had become the nation's parliament, the people's vote written in dust and paint. The question pressed heavier each day. Could one captain's vision transform tragedy into sovereignty? Or would the curse, familiar and merciless, swallow another generation whole? Outside the villages, beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the world's powers were circling. How would they respond to a small nation daring to defy the script of exploitation? Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the ripples of its gold discovery turned into waves that crashed upon foreign capitals. In Paris, diplomats remembered Niger's uranium and shuddered. Could Ouagadougou now slip beyond their grasp? In Washington, cautious memos circled between desks, warning that a small, landlocked state might ignite a larger African reckoning. Beijing, pragmatic and patient, weighed opportunity against resistance, while in Dubai and Sydney, investors scribbled figures in margins, waiting for cracks in Traore's armor. Regional blocs moved first. The African Union praised the rhetoric of dignity, but quietly questioned the risks of isolation. ECOWAS, already strained by political upheavals, hesitated between support and suspicion, fearing Burkina Faso's defiance might embolden other governments to reject foreign contracts. In Brussels, the European Union issued statements laced with diplomatic concern. Calls for responsible management thinly veiled the fear that new policies might choke European access to African resources. The United Nations added its voice, warning that unregulated mining across the Sahel was pushing ecosystems towards collapse. Yet critics in Ouagadougou replied sharply, where were these warnings when foreign companies poisoned our rivers? For many Burkinabe, the lectures from abroad felt less like guidance and more like hypocrisy. Western media framed Traoré as a radical disruptor. The Financial Times called his nationalizations unprecedented, while Bloomberg questioned whether the nation was turning away from global partnerships. Canadian outlets spoke of resource nationalism, threatening investment. But in African diaspora forums, the tone was different. Heated debates erupted under the banner of Burkina Faso latest news. Some called him reckless, others hailed him as a torchbearer of African independence. China's state media adopted a more cautious note. Commentaries described Burkina Faso as a challenging partner, signaling both interest and unease. Beijing saw both risk and precedent. If a small nation could demand refineries and community funds, what would stop larger African states from doing the same? Across boardrooms and parliaments, one phrase echoed African sovereignty. It was no longer a theoretical ideal. Burkina Faso had made it a policy. Contracts must be public, gold must be refined locally, profits must return to communities. For some, it was madness. For others, it was the very definition of sovereignty long denied. In Toronto, lawyers drafted arbitration threats. In Paris, lobbyists whispered of sanctions. In Washington, Analysts warned of a domino effect across West Africa. Yet in Ouagadougou, torches lit the night as crowds chanted a different truth. If sovereignty isolates us, then isolation is dignity. But could Burkina Faso carry the weight of sovereignty alone, standing firm against a world accustomed to exploiting Africa's soil? Or would the tide of global ambition eventually drown its defiance? The gold beneath Burkina Faso lies silent, but its weight presses upon every conversation, every decision, every heartbeat of the nation. What comes next? 3 paths unfold, each carrying both promise and peril. The first path is triumph. If Traoré's policies endure, if contracts remain public and refineries rise upon Burkinabe soil, the nation could capture what so many before had lost. Scholars trained in Ouagadougou could replace foreign engineers. Community funds could build wells and schools where hunger once reigned. In this vision, gold is no longer a curse but the seed of a harvest long denied. The story becomes one not of extraction, but of creation. A chapter where Africa writes its own value. The second path is collapse. History whispers its warnings from Congo's forests and Angola's oil fields. Lawsuits could drain treasuries, sanctions could choke markets, corruption could gnaw at even the strongest institutions. If promises falter, rivers will remain poisoned, children will still cough in the dust, and the gold that glittered with hope will bury the nation in despair. In this vision, the curse returns, darker than before, mocking the very word of sovereignty. Between triumph and collapse lies the third path, struggle. It is the road, most likely, the road of resistance met with pressure, of victories mixed with losses. In this vision, Burkina Faso bends but does not break. Refineries rise slowly, communities taste some benefits, and contracts face endless disputes. The nation moves forward not in leaps, but in steps, each step heavier than the last, yet each leaving a footprint of defiance upon the soil. Traoré himself framed it with a metaphor that echoed beyond borders. If gold is to serve us, every child, every farmer, every mother must feel its weight in bread, in water, in dignity. It is a vision that demands sacrifice, for sovereignty is not gifted. It is earned, defended, and paid for. In Ouagadougou's markets, vendors whisper both faith and fear. If this succeeds, we will feed our children with our own harvest. Another replies, shaking his head. And if it fails, we will drink the dust of our own soil. Both statements hold truth, for the road ahead is neither smooth nor certain. But one truth cuts deeper still. For the first time, a small Sahelian nation has dared to plant its seed not in the soil of submission, but in the soil of choice. The harvest is not guaranteed, yet the planting itself is already defiance. And so the question remains, can a seed of hope survive in soil long soaked with exploitation and grow into a harvest that future generations will call freedom? $60 billion beneath Burkina Faso's soil is more than a number. It is a mirror reflecting Africa's long struggle between promise and betrayal. We have seen this mirror before in Congo's mountains, where coltan and gold funded militias instead of schools. We have seen it in Niger's uranium lighting Paris while Niamey sat in darkness. We have seen it in Angola's oil, fueling skyscrapers while villages drank from poisoned wells. History has shown us the curse. Yet in Ouagadougou today, Captain Ibrahim Traoré declares a different path. Contracts must be public, gold must be refined locally, communities must hold their share. For once, a leader speaks as though the soil itself has a voice, and it speaks not of surrender, but of dignity. This is the heartbeat of anti-colonial Africa, not a slogan carved on walls, but a choice lived in policy. The risks remain vast. Lawsuits will come, sanctions may follow, and foreign powers will not loosen their grip without a fight. But for the first time in generations, a nation dares to say, better an empty treasury than a stolen one. And in that defiance lies a spark that may ignite across the continent. If one small, landlocked state can choose dignity over dependency, what stops others from following? This is where African sovereignty is no longer theory but practice, no longer rhetoric but roadmap. A refinery rising in Ouagadougou, scholarships for children once forced into tunnels, elders declaring sacred sites untouchable. These are not just policies. They are seeds planted in soil once stripped bare. Will the harvest come? Only time will answer. But the planting itself is resistance, and resistance itself is hope. So we end not with certainty, but with a question. Can Burkina Faso write the blessing where others wrote the curse? Can $60 billion become a mirror not of scars, but of renewal? The world is watching, and Africa is listening. If you believe this is the dawn of a new chapter in anti-colonial Africa, do not just watch, be part of the story. Subscribe, share, and let the world hear Africa's voice.